Hello and welcome back to the 5 Minute Film Club. The Desert Fox, the story of Rommel, was released in 1951, a mere 6 years after the end of the Second World War, and paints a rather sympathetic picture of a Nazi officer who may or may not have been involved in the famed 20th of July plot to assassinate Hitler. The Desert Fox starts with a pre-credit sequence. Now this is something that would become the staple of action films post-Bond, nearly a decade later. It does a great job of throwing audiences' expectations up in the air, and it's something that it manages to do throughout its running time. We then have a voiceover that introduces us to a captured Lieutenant Colonel Desmond Young, whose book on Rommel this film is based on and is played by himself in the film. It shows us how he briefly bumped into Rommel after being captured in the desert and making sure that it was his mission to find out more about this incredibly successful military leader. The rest of the film is then told in flashbacks. Here we meet Rommel, played magnificently by James Mason. He plays the role straight down the line, not giving much away, continually blurring the lines between fact and fiction. And I think the reason why his performance here is so celebrated is down to the fact that it could so easily have gone wrong. Turned into some grandiose character. Instead here he feels real. And also, he plays him in a way that works for, I imagine, an American or British audience at the time sitting down and watching him. He doesn't come across particularly the stereotypical German officer. He feels like his sympathies lie with the Allies. In fact, his version of Rommel is seen as the definitive one, and would later reprise it in Robert Wise's The Desert Rats. The film shows an increasingly frustrated Rommel being hampered by his overbearing and increasingly crazy leader, Adolf Hitler, played here very convincingly by Jewish actor Luther Adler.
No! That's exactly what I mean when I say you're no good at thinking above the battlefield. The British don't care for those villages. It's their London that they love. They don't want to see it destroyed the way I'm going to destroy it. In 2 more weeks, remember my words, they'll be screaming for surrender.
The final straw for Rommel is when the Allies managed to secure a foothold in Normandy, D-Day. After a few attempts to get Rommel to join a group of plotters against their leader, he finally succumbs and doesn't stand in their way when on the 20th of July, a bomb is placed in Hitler's conference room. It goes off and Hitler is killed. It goes off and of course Hitler survived. As the thousands of conspirators are rounded up and executed, a general arrives at Rommel's house to give him a choice, whether to be put on trial for treason and almost certainly face a painful death, or painlessly commit suicide with their help. The Desert Fox ends with this heroic shot of Rommel in front of his tank, and over the top we have a voiceover actor impersonating Winston Churchill delivering a speech that he gave in the House of Commons, where he mentions Rommel and the fact that he turned against Hitler in the end and he was a worthy enemy for Churchill to bring down. Now, what do I actually think about this film? If we're just going from an aesthetic point of view or performances, I think this is right up there. It does have a bit of a TV movie feel about it, but I think what it's going for is it's trying to, as I said earlier, blur the lines between fact and fiction. So you've got great performances by people like James Mason, who just own their parts so much that you can't help but be won over by them. And then there's real footage. A documentary that came out almost a decade before this film filmed all of the raids and battles across the desert of Africa. Lots of cameramen, completely unnamed, lost their lives making that documentary. And in fact, in the New York Times, a reviewer of the Desert Fox at the time says, "Have we forgotten the fact that this documentary came out?" So there's all these different elements going on, and for me it just doesn't work. I think that it needs distance and some sort of perspective. I think that aesthetically, as I said, the sets, particularly in the opening pre-credit sequence, are incredibly interesting and inventive. And the direction is snappy and exciting and never dull. James Mason, Jessica Tandy are amazing in their parts, but it just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't sit well. So, thank you very much for watching the review. I promise to do more, which I always do, and then, you know, life actually gets in the way and I never get the chance to do it. But next week, I will be reviewing... Go late on. Hey, here we are, from 1982. I will be watching and reviewing An Officer and a Gentleman. So I'll see you next week. Goodbye.